Deep beneath the ruins of New Geneva, Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her scaled palm against the bioscanner, watching her reflection shimmer with reptilian features that would have horrified her ancestors. The underground laboratory hummed with the energy of forbidden research, research that could reverse 6 generations of genetic tampering. Above ground, her people ruled a wasteland Earth, their bodies twisted into magnificent hybrid forms that had saved humanity from extinction during the Great Collapse of 2157. But Elena harbored a secret that could destroy everything. She was the last keeper of the original code, pure human DNA samples hidden for over 2 centuries. Her own bloodline carried traces of shadow wolf genetics, giving her enhanced senses that now screamed danger. The ancient bunker doors had opened for the first time in generations, and something was emerging, something that remembered what humanity used to be. The war between old and new was about to begin, but which side represented salvation? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scanner beeped its approval, and the reinforced steel door hissed open with a sound like escaping breath. Elena's nostrils flared involuntarily, catching traces of ozone and something else, something clean and sterile that made her hybrid senses recoil. Her shadow wolf heritage had given her night vision sharp enough to cut glass, but even she squinted as the laboratory's bioluminescent panels flickered to life, casting an eerie blue glow across walls lined with cryogenic storage units. Each unit contained a piece of humanity's lost puzzle. Vials of pre-collapse DNA floated in suspension fluid like captured starlight, labeled with clinical precision, sample 2156A, Homo sapiens sapiens, unmodified. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, a creature her ancestors would have called an abomination, was the only thing standing between these pure genes and complete extinction. Elena's comm device crackled, its static punctuated by the gravelly voice of Commander Thorne. His bare hybrid vocal cords had long since lost the ability to produce anything approaching human speech patterns. Vasquez, seismic sensors are picking up movement from Sector 7, the old Seattle bunkers. Her fingers tightened around the device, claws extending slightly before she caught herself and retracted them. How many? Unknown. But Elena. Thorne's pause carried weight. The signatures are wrong, too light, too uniform. Whatever's down there, it's not like us. Through the laboratory's single reinforced window, Elena could see the skyline of New Geneva, or what remained of it. Crystalline spires grew from the rubble of ancient skyscrapers, their surfaces pulsing with the same bioluminescence that powered their underground city. Her people had built something beautiful from humanity's ashes, something that could thrive in the poisoned atmosphere that had driven their ancestors underground in the first place. The first generation had been desperate. Elena knew from the archived records. When the atmospheric processes failed and the sky turned toxic, when the engineered plague swept across continents, humanity had faced a simple choice: evolve or die. The genetic fusion protocols had been humanity's Hail Mary, splicing animal DNA into human embryos to create beings capable of surviving in their transformed world. It had worked. The hybrids could breathe the toxic air, resist the mutated diseases, hunt the evolved predators that roamed the wasteland. They had not just survived, they had flourished, but survival came with a price. Elena caught her reflection again in a darkened monitor screen. Her grandmother's human features had given way to something altogether more predatory. Golden eyes with vertical pupils, skin that shifted between human flesh and obsidian scales depending on her emotional state, and teeth designed for tearing. She was beautiful in the way a storm was beautiful, magnificent and terrible in equal measure. A new alert chimed on her workstation. Seismic activity was spiking across multiple sectors. Not just Seattle, Los Angeles, Denver, Atlanta. The pattern was too coordinated to be coincidence. After 2 centuries of silence, the bunkers were opening simultaneously. Elena pulled up the archived schematics, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to process information at speeds that would have given a pure human a seizure. The bunker systems were more extensive than anyone had imagined, connected by a vast underground network that spanned continents. Whatever had triggered the awakening, it had reached them all at once. Her shadow wolf genetics whispered warnings as she worked. That primal part of her brain that had kept her bloodline alive for 6 generations. Something was coming, something that carried the scent of old sterile places and forgotten fears. The laboratory door sealed behind her as she prepared to ascend to the surface, the original code samples secure in their hidden chamber. Above, her hybrid kin would be gathering, their varied animal instincts all screaming the same message, predators approaching. But what did you call a predator that hunted apex predators? What did you call something that remembered when monsters were still human? Elena's claws extended fully as she stepped into the ascending platform. Whatever emerged from those bunkers would find the world much changed. The question was whether either side would recognize salvation when they saw it. The war for humanity's future was about to begin. The screaming had stopped 3 hours ago, but Kaya's enhanced hearing still caught the wet sounds echoing from the lower tunnels. Her talons clicked against the metal grating as she descended into the bowels of Settlement 7. Each step deliberate, despite the acidic burn spreading through her modified nervous system. The scent of fear, sweat, and something else, something clean and unfamiliar, hung thick in the recycled air. "Command wants answers," growled Marcus from behind her, his bulk barely fitting through the maintenance shaft. Where Kaya had inherited the sleek predatory modifications of her lineage, cat-like reflexes, infrared vision, retractable claws, Marcus bore the heavy bone plating and crushing strength of something that had once been called human. 3 squads down there, all 7th General all dead. Kaya paused at the intersection, her pupils dilating as she switched to thermal imaging. The tunnel stretched ahead in shades of blue and purple, cooling corpses scattered like broken dolls. But there, movement, faint heat signatures deeper in the complex. "Not all dead," she whispered, her voice carrying the subtle harmonic undertones that marked her generation. The modifications ran deeper than flesh now. Their very vocal cords had evolved, creating sounds that could disorient pure organic life forms. They found the first body 20 meters in. What remained of Santos hung suspended from a pipe junction, his natural armor plating peeled back like flower petals. The precision of the wounds made Kaya's enhanced adrenal system spike with recognition. This wasn't the work of the ferals, the failed experiments that sometimes broke containment. This was methodical, surgical. "Jesus fucking Christ," Marcus breathed, then caught himself. Religious expressions were discouraged among their kind. Too much connection to the old ways before Therong-He, the great fusion that had saved them from extinction. A metallic scraping echoed from ahead. Kaya held up a clawed hand, signaling silence. Her secondary nervous system was firing warnings now, flooding her bloodstream with combat stimulants that would have killed an unmodified human. Every instinct screamed that they were being hunted. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, one of the old hydroponics bays that had been converted to housing. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, but Kaya could see perfectly in the infrared spectrum. Her breath caught. Bodies, dozens of them. But these weren't their people. The corpses were wrong in ways that made her enhanced brain struggle to process the information. No modifications, no visible fusion markers, smooth, unarmored skin, symmetrical faces with small, inefficient teeth. Their limbs were thin, fragile things that could never have survived the toxic surface world. "What the hell are they?" Marcus rumbled, his voice dropping to subsonic frequencies that vibrated through the metal flooring. Before Kaya could answer, movement exploded from the shadows. 3 figures in form-fitting black material that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved with a fluid grace that her predatory instincts recognized as deeply dangerous, but wrong. Too limited, too pure. The first attacker came at her with something that gleamed silver in the emergency lighting. Kaya's modified reflexes kicked in, time seeming to slow as her enhanced metabolism shifted into overdrive. She could see the weapon now, crude metal sharpened to a molecular edge, primitive but effective. She twisted away from the thrust, her spine bending at angles that would have snapped an unmodified skeleton. Her claws raked across the attacker's torso, expecting to meet the familiar resistance of bone plating or chitinous armor. Instead, they sliced through flesh like water. The scream that erupted from the figure was purely human. No harmonic undertones, no subsonic elements, just raw terror and pain. Red blood, the color wrong somehow, too bright, splashed across the metal walls. Behind her, Marcus was grappling with the other two. His crushing strength should have ended the fight instantly, but the attackers were using weapons that sparked and hissed where they touched his armored hide. Some kind of electrical discharge system that interfered with their enhanced nervous systems. Kaya pressed her advantage, driving the wounded attacker against the wall. Up close, she could see details that made her enhanced pattern recognition systems fire urgent warnings. The bone structure was all wrong, the muscle density insufficient for survival, the skin smooth and unmarked by the ritual scarification that marked clan allegiance. "What are you?" she hissed, her harmonic voice set to a frequency that should have paralyzed any known life form. The figure looked up at her with eyes that held an intelligence she recognized but couldn't place. When it spoke, the words were in old tongue, the language from before the fusion. "We are what you used to be," it whispered, blood frothing at its lips. "And we have come to reclaim what you stole." The weapon in its hand shifted, revealing circuitry that hummed with familiar energy signatures, technology from the time before, from the deep bunkers that had been sealed when the surface world died. As understanding dawned, Kaya's enhanced survival instincts screamed a single terrifying truth. They weren't the hunters anymore. They had become the hunted. The screaming started at dawn. Kira bolted upright from her sleeping alcove, her enhanced hearing picking up frequencies that would have been impossible for the ancestors. The sound wasn't coming from the settlement, it was coming from below. She pressed her palm against the cold metal floor, feeling the vibrations travel through her bone-deep sensory network. Something was moving in the old subway tunnels beneath New Haven, something that had been dormant for generations. "Mira!" she called to her clutched sister without turning around. "You feel that?" The other girl emerged from the shadows, her serpentine lower body coiling with nervous energy. Where Kira had inherited wolf traits from the third-generation fusion, Mira bore the marks of something reptilian, scaled skin that shifted color with her emotions, currently a mottled gray of unease. "Underground movement," Mira confirmed, her forked tongue testing the air. "Multiple heat signatures. They're ascending." Another scream echoed through the settlement, this one closer. Kira recognized the voice, Chen, one of the perimeter guards. The sound cut off abruptly. They moved as one toward the central alarm, but before they could reach it, Elder Vasquez's voice boomed through the bio-neural network that connected all seventh-generation minds. "Do not sound the alarm. Gather the hunting packs. Silent protocol." Kira felt the familiar tingle as her pack bond activated. Across the settlement, her hunting sisters were already moving. Zoe with her predatory feline grace, Naya whose gills fluttered in anticipation, and Dom whose massive bulk betrayed surprising stealth. They converged at the armory with outspoken communication, each reaching for weapons their modified bodies could wield. The settlement's bioluminescent strips began to pulse in the pattern that meant unknown threat, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow. Kira's enhanced eyes adjusted automatically, pupils dilating to drink in every photon of light. "Perimeter is breached," Zoe reported, her voice a purring whisper. Chen's pod found something in Tunnel 7, no response for 15 minutes. Elder Vasquez materialized from the growing crowd, her ancient body a testament to the early crude fusions, where the seventh generation had achieved harmony between human and monster traits. The second generation bore the scars of desperate experimentation. Half her face was a mass of chitinous plates, and her left arm had been replaced entirely by something that resembled a mantis appendage. "They've been waiting," she said, her compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. "Waiting for us to grow comfortable, to forget." "Who?" Kira demanded, though part of her already knew. "The pure ones, the unchanged." A collective shiver ran through the assembled pack leaders. Stories of the pure-blood humans were relegated to cautionary tales told to juveniles, humans who had refused the fusion, who had hidden in their bunkers while the world above burned and transformed. "That's impossible," Dom rumbled, his bear-like features creasing with skepticism. "The surface scans show nothing, no settlements, no technology signatures." "Because they never went to the surface," Vasquez replied. "They went deeper, much deeper." The light suddenly cut out, plunging them into absolute darkness. For a heartbeat, even Kira's enhanced vision couldn't penetrate the black. Then the emergency biolumps engaged, casting everything in a hellish red glow. In that light, they saw them. Pure-blood humans stood at every entrance to the central chamber. Their unmarked skin seemed almost obscene in its smoothness, their round pupils fixed and predatory. They wore form-fitting suits that seemed to bend light around them and carried weapons that hummed with unfamiliar energy. But it wasn't their appearance that sent ice through Kira's veins. It was their eyes, cold, calculating, and absolutely certain of their superiority. "Specimens," one of them spoke, his voice carrying through some kind of amplification system. "The experiment has concluded. You will submit for processing." Vasquez stepped forward, her mantis arm clicking ominously. "We are the inheritors of this world. You are the dead past." The pure-blood humans smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. "You are aberrations, genetic pollution that we allowed to fester while we developed the means to cleanse it." He raised his weapon, and Kira felt something she'd never experienced before, the sensation of being prey. Her wolf instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. "The surface belongs to humanity again," the pure blood continued. "Pure humanity. You will be studied, catalogued, and recycled into something useful." The weapon charged with a high whine that made Kira's enhanced hearing feel like it was bleeding. Around the chamber, more purebloods emerged from hidden positions, their own weapons trained on the frozen monster-human hybrids. "Your time is over," the lead human said. "Evolution moves backward tonight." The first shot lit up the chamber like lightning, and the war between humanity's past and its transformed future began in earnest. The ancient elevator descended through layers of earth and forgotten time, its brass mechanisms grinding with the weight of centuries. Maya pressed herself against the cold metal wall as Thorn's phosphorescent veins pulsed brighter in the darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced across their faces. The air grew thick and stale, carrying the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere and something else, the scent of fear. "How deep does this go?" she whispered, watching the depth counter tick past numbers that seemed impossible. 300 meters. 400. 5. Thorn's jaw worked silently, the bone ridges along his temples flaring with each pulse of bioluminescence. "Deep enough to hide an entire civilization," he finally said. "Deep enough to wait out the end of the world." The elevator shuddered to a halt at 700 meters below ground. When the doors opened, Maya's breath caught in her throat. Before them stretched a vast underground city, its architecture pristine and untouched by the chaos that had consumed the surface. Clean white corridors extended in perfect geometric patterns, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that hurt her enhanced eyes. The air hummed with the sound of ventilation systems and distant machinery, all of it functioning with mechanical precision. But it was the people that made her blood freeze. They emerged from doorways and side passages like ghosts given form, dozens, then hundreds of them. Their skin was pale as bone from generations without sunlight, their eyes large and dark from adaptation to artificial light. But beneath that pallor lay something Maya recognized with primal terror, They were completely, utterly human. No scales, no extra limbs, no bioluminescent tracery, no fusion-born enhancements of any kind. Pure blood humans, the original template. Seventh-generation abominations, one of them spoke, his voice carrying the authority of leadership. He was tall and gaunt, wearing pristine military fatigues that bore no resemblance to any surface faction Maya knew. "We've been monitoring your heat signatures since you entered the ruins above." Maya's hand instinctively moved toward her weapon, but Thorn caught her wrist. His touch burned against her skin. Literally. The fusion-born ran hotter than baseline humans, their enhanced metabolisms generating more heat than these underground dwellers were used to. "We're not looking for trouble," Thorn said carefully. "We were tracking harbinger signals. Our settlements are under threat." The pale man laughed, and the sound echoed through the sterile corridors like breaking glass. "Under threat? You are the threat. You and every other twisted thing that crawls across our poisoned world." He gestured to his followers, who began forming a circle around the elevator. "My name is Commander Reeves. Welcome to Haven Station, the last bastion of true humanity." Maya counted at least 50 of them now, more emerging from the depths of the facility. They moved with military precision, but something was wrong with their coordination. Their steps were too synchronized, their breathing too rhythmic, as if they were operating on some kind of shared frequency. "You've been down here since the Great Fusion," she said, not really asking. 7 generations. Watching us change, waiting and preparing," Reeves confirmed. "Waiting for the abominations to weaken themselves through constant warfare, preparing to reclaim what was stolen from us." His dark eyes fixed on Thorn's glowing veins. "Do you know what you are, fusion-born? You're a contamination, a cancer that grew from humanity's weakness." Thorn's bone ridges flared, his body temperature spiking. Maya could feel the heat radiating from him in waves. "We survived. We adapted. We became stronger. You became monsters." Reeves pulled something from his belt, a device Maya didn't recognize, sleek and humming with contained energy. "We've spent 2 centuries developing weapons specifically designed to counter your enhancements. Frequency modulators that disrupt your nervous systems, thermal dampeners that shut down your enhanced metabolisms, genetic purifiers that—" He didn't finish the sentence. Thorn had moved faster than human eyes could follow, his fusion-enhanced reflexes closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. But Reeves was ready. The device in his hand emitted a high-pitched whine, and Thorn collapsed mid-stride, his body convulsing as the sound waves interfered with his hybrid nervous system. Maya drew her weapon, but the other pure bloods were already moving. They flowed around her like water, their movements eerily coordinated. One of them pressed something cold against her neck, an injector of some kind. She felt a sharp sting, then a creeping numbness that started at the injection site and spread outward. "Neurosuppressant," Reeves explained as Maya's vision began to blur. "Specifically formulated to counteract fusion-born enhancements. You'll live, but your mutations will be temporarily pacified." As consciousness faded, Maya's last clear thought was a revelation that chilled her more than the spreading numbness. The purebloods moved like a hive mind, their actions too perfectly synchronized for individual decision-making. In their desperate attempt to remain unchanged, to stay purely human, they had apparently surrendered something essentially human, their individuality. The war between what humanity was and what it had become had found its first casualties. The screaming had stopped 3 hours ago, but Kira's enhanced hearing still caught the echo bouncing through the ventilation shafts. She pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the observation deck, feeling the vibrations of movement far below in the bunker's depths. The pure bloods were stirring again. "They're adapting faster than we anticipated," Dr. Voss murmured, his voice barely a whisper despite the reinforced barriers between them and their subjects. The scientist's own modifications were subtle, enhanced neural pathways that made his eyes glow faintly blue when he concentrated, and fingers that could interface directly with the bunker's biotech systems. "Look at specimen 7. Kira followed his gaze to the main viewing screen. The pure-blood female sat motionless in her containment cell, but something was different. Her breathing had changed, become more measured. The random panic attacks that had plagued her for the first week had vanished entirely. More disturbing still, she'd begun to arrange the sparse furniture in her cell with geometric precision, creating patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. She's not just adapting to captivity, Kira realized, her throat sacs pulsing as she spoke. She's preparing for something. The bunker shuddered suddenly, a deep rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emergency lights flickered on, bathing the observation deck in bloody red. Through the enhanced communication network that linked all seventh-generation minds, Kira felt a surge of alarm from the perimeter guards. "Report!" she commanded, her voice carrying through the bio-neural links. Marcus's thoughts flooded back to her, tinged with confusion and fear. They're not attacking, they're singing. Kira's spines bristled involuntarily. She'd heard stories from the older generations about pure blood rituals, ancient practices that predated the Great Fusion. Music had been important to them, but she'd dismissed it as primitive nostalgia. Now, as the bunker's sensors picked up the harmonious voices rising from the wasteland above, she realized they'd gravely underestimated their captives' connection to their surface cousins. Dr. Voss's fingers were already interfaced with the monitoring systems, data streaming directly into his consciousness. "The pure bloods in containment are responding to the singing," he reported, his enhanced eyes now blazing bright blue, heart rate synchronized, brainwave patterns aligning. "It's like they're networking, but without any technology we can detect." On the screens, all 12 pure blood prisoners had moved to the walls of their cells closest to the surface. They stood perfectly still, heads tilted upward, listening. Their lips moved in silent harmony with the voices above. "Shut down the audio feeds," Kira ordered, but Dr. Voss shook his head. "I can't. They're not hearing it through their ears anymore. Look." He gestured to the neural activity monitors. The pure blood's brains showed patterns unlike anything in the seventh-generation databases. Instead of the sharp, efficient signals that characterized modified human thought, their neural networks pulsed in waves like living music. The bunker shuddered again, more violently this time. Dust rained from the ceiling as something massive moved across the surface above them. Through the perimeter guards' shared senses, Kira glimpsed impossible shapes silhouetted against the toxic sky. Dozens of pure bloods standing in perfect formation, their voices weaving together in harmonies that seemed to resonate with the earth itself. "They're calling to something," Dr. Voss whispered, his voice tight with fear. "The seismic sensors are picking up movement deep underground. Something's responding to their song." Kira's mind raced through tactical possibilities. The seventh generation had built this bunker to withstand anything: radiation, chemical weapons, even nuclear bombardment. But they designed it to resist external attacks, not internal dissolution. If the pure bloods could somehow destabilize the structure from within. A new sound joined the singing from above, deep, thrumming notes that seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself. The containment cell's reinforced walls began to crack, hairline fractures spreading like spiderwebs across the transparent aluminum. "Impossible," Dr. Voss breathed. "The resonance frequency should be completely random. There's no way they could—" His words cut off as Specimen 7 pressed her palm against her cell wall. The cracks in the transparent aluminum widened, following the exact pattern of veins in her hand. She smiled for the first time since her capture, revealing teeth that seemed somehow sharper than they had been days before. Evolution, Kira realized with growing horror. They're not just pure blood humans. There's something new. The singing above reached a crescendo, and the deep earth notes answered with a roar that shook the bunker to its foundations. Every screen in the observation deck flickered and died as the facility's power grid overloaded. In the darkness, Kira heard the distinct sound of transparent aluminum shattering, followed by footsteps in the corridors below. Emergency power kicked in, but the containment level remained dark. Through the bio-neural network, she felt her guards' confusion turning to terror as they reported empty cells and missing prisoners. The pure bloods were free, and they were no longer alone. The screaming started at dawn. Kaya bolted upright from her makeshift bed in the abandoned subway tunnel, her enhanced hearing picking up frequencies that would have been impossible for the old humans to detect. The sound wasn't coming from above ground. It was deeper, resonating through the earth itself like a wounded animal crying out from the planet's core. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to Marcus, who was already on his feet, his reptilian scales rippling with agitation along his arms. "The bunkers," he said, his voice tight with something between fear and anticipation. "They're opening." The other members of their scavenging group stirred restlessly. There were 12 of them now, all 7th generation, all bearing the marks of humanity's desperate bargain with survival. Zara's moth-like wings twitched nervously in her sleep, while Jin's extra arms flexed unconsciously as nightmares played behind his closed eyes. Kaya pressed her palm against the tunnel wall, feeling the vibrations travel through her bones, her own modifications, enhanced musculature borrowed from some long-extinct predator, allowed her to sense the mechanical precision of the sounds. This wasn't random, it was coordinated. "We need to move," Marcus said, gathering his pack. "If they're coming up after a century underground, they won't be happy about what they find." The group emerged from the tunnel system into the grey light of early morning. The city around them told the story of humanity's transformation in broken concrete and twisted metal. Skyscrapers had been modified into hives for the winged generations. Streets were carved with channels for the aquatic variants. Everything had been reshaped to accommodate what they'd become. But now, from carefully concealed locations throughout the urban landscape, sections of Earth were sliding away to reveal pristine metal surfaces. Bunker doors, untouched by the decades of mutation and adaptation above. The first pure-blood human Kaya saw stepped into the light, wearing a white environmental suit that gleamed like a beacon against the mottled greys and browns of the modified city. Even through the suit's visor, she could see the human's face, perfectly symmetrical, unmarked by any genetic fusion, exactly as humans had been before the Great Dying. The pure blood raised something that looked like a weapon, scanning the area with methodical precision. When the device's beam passed over a cluster of modified humans several blocks away, the machine emitted a sharp pulse, and the figures collapsed instantly. "They're culling us," Zara said, her wings unfurling instinctively, despite the danger of being seen. "They think we're the monsters." More bunker doors opened across the city. Dozens, then hundreds of pure bloods emerged, all wearing identical white suits, all carrying the same scanning weapons. They moved through the streets like antibodies attacking an infection, methodical and merciless. Marcus grabbed Kaya's arm, his claws extending involuntarily. "Look at them! Look how they move!" Kaya watched the purebloods coordinate their sweep patterns without speaking to each other, their movements perfectly synchronized. They're linked somehow. Neural implants, maybe. They planned this. A century underground hadn't been spent in mere survival. It had been preparation for reclamation. The group retreated deeper into the modified city, where the architecture itself would provide some protection. But as they moved, Kaya noticed something that made her stomach twist, with a mixture of fear and rage. The purebloods weren't just eliminating the modified humans they found, they were cataloging them, taking samples, studying the very genetic fusions that had allowed the 7th generation to inherit a poisoned world. They want to understand what we are, she realized. They're not just cleaning house, they're gathering data. One of the pure bloods appeared at the end of their street, its white suit stark against the organic curves of a building that had been grown rather than built. The figure raised its scanning weapon, and the device's hum grew louder as it focused on their group. Jin moved faster than Kaya had ever seen him move, his multiple arms allowing him to scale the building's surface like a spider. He dropped onto the pure blood from above, but the moment his modified flesh made contact with the environmental suit, electricity coursed through his body and he fell convulsing to the ground. The pure blood stepped over Jin's twitching form without pause, raising the weapon again. This time, Marcus didn't hesitate. His transformation was swift and terrible, bones extending, muscles bulging, his human features disappearing beneath the predatory mask that represented humanity's darkest bargain. He moved with inhuman speed, closing the distance before the pure blood could react. But when Marcus's claws tore through the environmental suit, what spilled out wasn't blood. It was something else entirely, a pale, luminescent fluid that hissed when it hit the ground. The pure blood continued moving, even with its suit breached, even with Marcus's claws embedded in what should have been vital organs. It turned its masked face toward him and spoke in a voice that sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. Genetic deviation detected. Elimination protocol activated. Kaya stared at the thing in the white suit, understanding finally dawning with horrible clarity. They weren't pure-blood humans at all. The screaming stopped at dawn. Kira pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, watching smoke rise from the lower sectors. The emergency broadcasts had been cycling the same message for 6 hours: containment breach in Sector 7. All residents remain in designated safe zones. Pure blood forces advancing. She traced a claw along the window's surface, leaving thin scratches in the supposedly impenetrable material. Below, she could see them, figures in white hazmat suits moving with mechanical precision through the ruins of what had been her childhood neighborhood. The pure bloods carried weapons that hummed with an energy that made her teeth ache even from this distance. "They're not just killing us," Marcus said behind her, his voice carrying the grinding undertone that meant his throat modifications were stressed. "They're studying us." Kira turned to find him hunched over a salvaged comm unit, his elongated fingers dancing across controls that had been designed for baseline human hands. His face bore the distinctive ridged bone structure of the 5th-generation modifications, not as extreme as our own 7th-gen alterations, but enough to mark him as permanently other in the eyes of their attackers. "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her already knew. The tactical strikes had been too precise, too calculated. The pure bloods weren't acting with the desperate fury of survivors. They moved with the cold efficiency of scientists conducting an experiment. Marcus manipulated the display, showing her intercepted transmission fragments. "Listen to their chatter. They're not talking about extermination protocols. They're discussing harvest quotas." The audio crackled with static, but the voices underneath were unmistakably human, the original kind of human. Specimen preservation priority. 7 alpha, cranial modifications intact, neural tissue viable for extraction. Kira's stomach lurched, not entirely from revulsion. The hunger was getting stronger, and stress made it worse. She could smell Marcus's blood, could hear the rapid percussion of his modified heart, could sense the electromagnetic signatures of his cybernetic implants. Her body wanted to feed, to absorb his genetic material and integrate his abilities into her own rapidly evolving cellular structure. She bit down hard on her inner cheek, tasting copper. The pain helped her focus, helped her remember that she was still partially human despite what the geneticists had done to her bloodline. "We need to reach the deep labs," she said. "If there's any record of what they did to create us, any way to understand what we've become—" "The labs are gone," a new voice interrupted from the doorway. Kira spun, instantly cataloguing threat markers, heart rate, pheromone signature, potential weapons. Then she recognized the scent and forced herself to relax. Dr. Sarah Chen stepped into the room, her white lab coat stained with something that definitely wasn't supposed to be purple. Her modifications were subtle, enhanced eyes that glowed faintly amber in the dim light, reinforced bone structure that gave her an unnaturally rigid posture. 2nd generation, from the early days when they'd still been careful about preserving human appearance. "The pure bloods hit the research district first," Chen continued. "Surgical strikes. They knew exactly where to find our genetic archives, our development records, everything we might have used to understand ourselves." She paused, studying Kira with those predatory amber eyes. They've been planning this for decades. Marcus looked up from his comm unit. That's impossible. The bunker seals couldn't have been broken from the inside, and surface communications have been dark since the collapse. Unless they were never really sealed at all, Chen said quietly. Unless some of them stayed up here, watching us, studying us as we changed. She moved to the window, her enhanced vision able to pick out details in the smoke and chaos below that remained invisible to the others. The modifications were never random, were they? 7 generations of increasingly radical genetic fusion, each one building on the last, each one pushed in specific directions. Kira felt something cold settle in her chest. You're saying we were guided, controlled. I'm saying we were bred. Chen's reflection in the glass showed too many teeth, like livestock, like weapons. Take your pick. The building shuddered as something massive impacted the lower levels. Emergency lighting flickered, casting shifting red shadows across their faces. In the distance, Kira could hear the sound she'd been dreading, the harmonic whine of containment fields powering up. The purebloods weren't just harvesting genetic material from the dead. They were taking prisoners. There's something else, Chen said, pulling a data crystal from her coat. I managed to extract this from the ruins of Lab 7 before the fires reached it. Genetic template files from the original fusion experiments. She slotted the crystal into Marcus's comm unit, and the display filled with scrolling code that meant nothing to Kira but made Marcus go very still. What is it? Kira demanded. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. The templates, they're not human-monster fusion at all. He looked up at them, his modified eyes wide with something approaching terror. We're monster-human fusion. The base genetic matrix isn't Homo sapiens. Then what are we? Something that was never supposed to exist. The screaming started before dawn. Kira bolted upright in her makeshift bedroll, her enhanced hearing picking up frequencies that would have been impossible for pure-blood ears to detect. The sound came from the eastern perimeter of their camp, where Marcus had stationed the night watch. But these weren't cries of alarm. They were something far worse, something primal and desperate, like an animal caught in a trap. She was already moving, her hybrid reflexes propelling her through the darkness faster than any baseline human could follow. Behind her, she heard the others stirring, their own enhanced senses finally catching what hers had detected minutes earlier. The acrid smell of burning flesh reached her nostrils, followed by something else, something sweet and cloying that made her stomach turn. The watchtower stood empty, its metal framework twisted into impossible angles. Below it, 3 figures writhed on the ground, their bodies contorting in ways that defied anatomy. Kira recognized them as members of Marcus's inner circle, stalwart defenders who had survived countless raids against pure-blood settlements. Now they were changing, their hybrid genetics accelerating beyond all known parameters. Elena's bones were elongating, pushing through her skin in sharp protrusions that gleamed wetly in the pre-dawn light. Her face had stretched into something lupine, but wrong. Too many teeth, eyes that had multiplied and split into compound structures that reminded Kira of the insect DNA that ran through their bloodlines. The woman who had been their best tracker was becoming something that belonged in nightmares. "Stay back!" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos as he emerged from his command tent, weapon drawn. But even his enhanced physiology couldn't hide the tremor in his hands as he took in the scene. Nobody gets close until we understand what's happening. The second figure, Zhao, their demolitions expert, had stopped screaming. His transformation was nearly complete, his human torso now supporting what appeared to be multiple sets of arms, each ending in chitinous claws that clicked against the rocky ground. Where his legs should have been, a serpentine tail thrashed with enough force to crack stone. His eyes, when they focused on the gathering crowd, held no recognition of his former comrades. "The pure bloods," Dr. Chen whispered, her voice barely audible. She had approached despite Marcus's warning, her scientific curiosity overriding her survival instincts. This has to be their doing. Some kind of biological weapon. Kira watched in horror as the third victim, Sarah, barely 18 and one of the newest additions to their group, began to dissolve. That was the only word that fit what was happening to her. Her flesh was liquefying, but instead of pooling on the ground, it was reforming into something that defied classification. Tentacles writhed where her arms had been, and her torso had become a pulsing mass that seemed to breathe through pores that opened and closed rhythmically. "We need to contain them," Marcus said, but his words lacked conviction. How did you contain something that was still changing, still evolving into forms that challenged the very concept of containment? The answer came when Elena's transformation reached its crescendo. The creature she had become let out a sound that was part howl, part electronic screech, a noise that bypassed the ears entirely and seemed to resonate in their bones. Then she moved. Hybrid reflexes meant nothing when faced with something that could relocate itself through space in quantum jumps. One moment Elena was 30 feet away, the next she was among them, her transformed claws raking across Torres's chest before anyone could react. The big man's bioarmor, designed to withstand pure blood plasma weapons, parted like tissue paper. Chaos erupted. The camp's defensive systems activated automatically, but their targeting protocols couldn't lock onto creatures that violated basic physics. Joao's serpentine form coiled around the base of a communication tower, crushing the metal structure while his multiple arms reached for anyone within range. Sarah's liquid mass had begun to spread, flowing across the ground in search of new victims to incorporate into her expanding form. "Fall back to the secondary perimeter," Marcus shouted, but half his force was already running. These were hardened survivors, veterans of the uprising who had faced pure blood technology and lived to tell about it. But this was different. This challenged everything they thought they knew about the limits of their own genetic modifications. Kira found herself backing away with the others, her mind racing. The pure bloods had been underground for 7 generations, isolated from the surface world's evolution. How could they have developed something like this? Unless, "They're not trying to kill us," she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "They're trying to perfect us." Dr. Chen's head snapped toward her. "What do you mean?" "Look at the transformation patterns. The enhanced capabilities. They're not destroying our hybrid genetics, they're accelerating them, taking them to their logical conclusion." Kira's voice dropped to a whisper as the full implications became clear. "They want to see what we become when all limits are removed." Around them, the screaming continued, but now it sounded different, less like agony and more like birth cries. The screaming started at dawn. Kira pressed herself against the crumbling concrete wall, her modified hearing picking up the chaos erupting 3 blocks away. The purebloods had found another nest of 7th-generation refugees. Through the acrid smoke drifting across the ruined cityscape, she could smell the distinctive copper ozone scent of plasma weapons discharging. Her claws extended involuntarily, scraping against stone. The sound made Marcus flinch beside her, his reptilian eyes darting between her face and the source of the distant violence. "They're getting closer," he whispered, the words emerging as a low hiss through his modified vocal cords. "Every day, they push further into our territory." Kira nodded, forcing her claws to retract. After 6 months of this war, she'd learned to control most of her predatory responses. Most of them. The hunger was different. That gnawed at her constantly now, growing stronger with each passing day. The genetic modifications that had saved humanity 7 generations ago were evolving again, and not in ways anyone had anticipated. A new sound cut through the morning air, the mechanical whir of hunter drones. Kira's enhanced vision caught the glint of metal moving between the skeletal remains of skyscrapers. 6 drones, maybe 7, sweeping in a grid pattern. "Move," she breathed. They slipped through a gap in the wall, emerging into what had once been a shopping mall. Nature had reclaimed most of it. Vines twisted through shattered escalators, and bioluminescent fungi provided patches of sickly green light. But it wasn't nature that made Kira's skin crawl, it was the silence. This place should have been teeming with life. Mutant rats, feral cats with too many eyes, the chittering swarms of modified insects that had somehow survived the original plague. Instead, she found only empty cocoons hanging from the ceiling like grotesque fruit. Marcus touched her shoulder, pointing deeper into the maw. Something large had moved through here recently. The fungal growths were trampled, and deep gouges marked the floor. Whatever had made those marks possessed claws that dwarfed her own. Eighth generation? Marcus suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Kira shook her head. The modifications were accelerating, yes, but not that quickly. This was something else, something that had been hunting in their territory while they'd been focused on the pure blood threat. They moved deeper into the structure, following the trail. Kira's nose caught a scent that made her stomach clench with sudden, vicious hunger. It was familiar yet wrong, the smell of modified human flesh, but altered in ways that triggered every predatory instinct in her rewired nervous system. The trail led to what had been a department store. Mannequins lay scattered across the floor, their plastic heads gnawed by powerful jaws. And there, suspended from the ceiling by thick strands of what looked like webbing, hung the remains of 3 seventh-generation fighters she recognized. But they weren't dead. Their eyes tracked movement as Kira and Marcus entered the space. Their mouths opened and closed soundlessly, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that definitely hadn't been there a week ago. What did this to them? Marcus backed toward the entrance, his own modifications shifting into defensive configurations. Bone plates emerged along his forearms, and his skin took on the mottled coloration that had helped their kind survive the wasteland. Before Kira could answer, the webbing above them began to vibrate. Something was moving in the shadows near the ceiling, something large enough to have created this feeding web. She caught a glimpse of what might have been a human torso, but the limbs were wrong, too long and jointed in impossible places. Multiple eyes reflected their bioluminescent light source, arranged in clusters along what had once been a face. The thing spoke, and its voice was a harmony of hunger. "Sister," it said, the word emerging from 3 different throats. "You smell of the old modifications. Come closer. Let me show you what we're becoming." Kira's claws extended again, but this time she felt something else happening. The genetic triggers that had been dormant in her cells suddenly activated, responding to some chemical signal in the air. Her vision sharpened beyond anything she'd experienced, and when she looked at Marcus, she could see the blood vessels beneath his skin, could hear the rhythm of his pulse like a dinner bell. The hunger surged, no longer a manageable craving but a consuming need. "Run," she managed to say, though part of her, a growing part, wanted him to stay, wanted him to come closer so she could taste the modifications in his flesh, understand them through consumption. Marcus must have seen something in her expression that convinced him. He bolted for the entrance, while Kira struggled against the chemical changes flooding her system. Above them, the spider thing that had once been human laughed with multiple voices. "You can't fight evolution, sister. The pure bloods think they're hunting us, but we're already becoming something they can't comprehend, something that will hunt them." The screaming in the distance had stopped. In the sudden silence, Kira could hear new sounds, the patient skittering of things that had once been human, moving through the ruins with purpose. The war had just become more complicated. The screaming had stopped 3 hours ago, but Maya could still hear it echoing through the abandoned subway tunnels. She pressed herself against the cold concrete wall, feeling the familiar itch beneath her skin as her dormant genes responded to stress. The chitinous plates along her spine wanted to emerge, but she forced them down. Not yet. Footsteps approached, too heavy, too deliberate to be human. One of hers, then. Maya's enhanced hearing caught the distinctive whistle of air through modified respiratory slits. She relaxed marginally. "Kyle," she whispered. The massive form that rounded the corner bore little resemblance to the boy she'd grown up with in the settlement. 7 feet of corded muscle and bone, his skin had taken on the mottled grey-green of deep ocean predators. Gills fluttered along his elongated neck as he processed both air and the chemical signatures in the tunnel's stagnant atmosphere. "They're gone," he said, his voice a wet rasp through his transformed larynx. "All of them. The pure bloods took everything they could carry." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. Survivors? Kyle's head tilted, and she caught a glimpse of the secondary eyelids that protected his vision in low light. 3, maybe 4, hard to tell with the pieces. The itch intensified. Maya's fingernails began to elongate, sharpening into the curved talons that had saved her life more times than she could count. She'd inherited the modifications of a extinct species of tunneling predator, perfect for the underground war they now found themselves fighting. "They knew exactly where to hit," she said. "Someone's feeding them information. The Council thinks it's impossible. They say no 7th generation would betray their own kind." Maya almost laughed. The Council still believed in unity, in the bonds forged by their shared mutations. They didn't understand that evolution wasn't just about physical adaptation. It was about survival at any cost. A distant vibration thrummed through the tunnel walls. Maya's enhanced nervous system translated the sensation instantly. Vehicles approaching fast from the north entrance. "Too many to be friendly." "Company," she growled. Kyle's transformation was fluid and terrible. His human facade dissolved as emergency genetics kicked in, flooding his system with combat hormones. His jaw unhinged slightly, revealing rows of serrated teeth. The gills along his neck flared wide, processing the maximum amount of oxygen his hybrid physiology could manage. Maya let her own changes flow. The chitinous plates erupted along her spine and shoulders, forming natural armor. Her vision shifted into the infrared spectrum as her eyes adapted to the tunnel's darkness. Most dramatically, her fingers extended into foot-long claws capable of punching through steel. The first pure-blood soldiers appeared 50 meters down the tunnel, their primitive night vision goggles glowing like green fireflies. Maya counted 12 heat signatures, all clustered together in standard formation. They moved with the practiced efficiency of a species that had spent generations perfecting the art of killing their own children. "Spread formation," whispered a voice that carried clearly to Maya's enhanced hearing. "Remember, they're not human anymore. Show no mercy." The irony wasn't lost on her. They spoke of mercy while hunting down the descendants of humans who had sacrificed their very DNA to ensure the species' survival. When the world had burned and the monsters had risen from melted polar ice and poisoned oceans, it was their ancestors who had made the terrible choice to splice their genes with nightmare creatures. The pure bloods had simply hidden underground and waited. Maya caught Kyle's eye and gestured toward the ceiling. He nodded, understanding. They'd done this dance before. She launched herself upward, claws finding purchase in the concrete. Her modified skeletal structure made her impossibly light for her size, and she moved across the tunnel ceiling like a spider. Below, Kyle began his approach from ground level, using the shadows and his natural camouflage to become nearly invisible. The pure blood squad never saw them coming. Maya dropped onto the lead soldier, her claws punching through his tactical vest and into the soft flesh beneath. His scream echoed off the tunnel walls as she rode him down, using his falling body to absorb the impact. Around her, chaos erupted as Kyle tore through the formation like a shark through a school of fish. But even as Maya fought, even as her hybrid physiology gave her advantages, the pure bloods couldn't match. She felt the weight of inevitability. There were thousands of them down there in their pristine bunkers, perfectly preserved specimens of what humanity used to be. And there were so few of her kind left. The last soldier fell with Kyle's teeth in his throat. Maya stood among the bodies, her armor plates slowly retracting as the combat hormones faded from her system. Blood, red and human and somehow wrong, pooled around her feet. "We can't keep this up," Kyle said, his own transformation reversing. "They'll wear us down eventually." Maya nodded, but her attention had shifted to something else. Among the dead soldiers' equipment was a communication device, still crackling with incoming transmissions. She picked it up, her enhanced hearing passing the static-laden voices. What she heard made her blood freeze. They knew about the nest. The screaming from the lower tunnels had stopped 3 hours ago. That silence terrified Kira more than any sound the purebloods could make. She pressed her transformed fingers against the cold steel of the bunker wall, feeling the vibrations that traveled through metal and stone. Her enhanced senses, gifts from generations of careful genetic fusion, detected the subtle shifts in air pressure that meant movement far below. They were coming up. "Report," she whispered into her comm, though she knew the answer would disappoint her. "Section 7 is dark," came Marcus's voice, distorted by the interference that plagued their deeper levels. "Section 8, we lost contact an hour ago. The purebloods, they're not just killing us, Kira. They're doing something else." Kira's scaled skin rippled with involuntary fear. The ancient humans had emerged from their pristine underground cities with technology that defied understanding, weapons that turned their own genetic gifts against them. But worse than their machines was their absolute certainty that the hybrids, the evolved descendants of humanity's survivors, were abominations that needed cleansing. A soft, chittering sound echoed from the ventilation shaft above her head. Kira looked up to see Nox, her scout, emerge headfirst like a spider. His multiple eyes glowed with bioluminescent fear. "They're 3 levels down," he hissed through mandibles that clicked nervously. "But Kira, you need to see what they're doing to our people." She followed him through passages that grew narrower as they descended, her body automatically adjusting to the confined space. This was survival evolution at its finest. Her bones could compress, her organs shift, her very structure adapt to any environment. The purebloods called it monstrous. She called it life. The corridor opened into what had once been their main gathering chamber. Now it was a charnel house of transformation. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, but they weren't dead. They were changing, writhing as their carefully cultivated genetic modifications reversed themselves, pulling back centuries of adaptation in minutes. "The serum," Nox whispered. "They're injecting our people with something that strips away the fusion genes, but the process, the human base can't survive without them anymore. We've been this way too long." Kira watched in horror as Vera, a woman whose gills had allowed her to work in their flooded sectors, gasped and clawed at her throat as the organs sealed themselves shut while she still needed them to breathe. Her friend's face had returned to purely human features, but her lungs couldn't process standard atmosphere anymore. She was suffocating on air her ancestors had breathed freely. "They think they're saving us," Kira realized with mounting fury. "They think they're making us human again." A new sound echoed through the chamber, the march of synchronized footsteps. The purebloods moved in perfect formation, their unmodified bodies somehow radiating more menace than any hybrid mutation. They wore white environment suits that gleamed under the emergency lighting, and their faces behind clear visors showed no trace of doubt or mercy. "Subjects located," announced their leader, a woman whose voice carried the authority of someone who had never known uncertainty. "Begin purification protocol." The weapons they carried didn't fire bullets or energy beams. Instead, they released clouds of silver mist that hung in the air like deadly fog. Where it touched the remaining hybrids, skin began to smooth, scales fell away, and enhanced muscles withered back to baseline human normal. Kira felt the first tendrils of the mist reach her, and immediately her body began to rebel against itself. The fusion genes that had been integrated into every cell started to break down. But unlike the purebloods' expectations, this wasn't a return to natural humanity. This was systematic cellular failure. "Fall back," she commanded, but her voice came out wrong as her vocal cords restructured themselves. The retreat became a rout, as hybrids fled through passages that their changing bodies could no longer navigate properly. She reached the emergency shaft and began to climb, her fingernails already losing the hardened keratin that had made them perfect for gripping metal. Behind her, she could hear the pureblood leader speaking into her own communication device. "Control, this is Purification Team 7. The reversal process is working, but the subjects are not surviving the transition. Recommend immediate adjustment to serum concentration." "Negative, Team 7, came the response. "Dr. Henriksen's data is clear. A few generations of genetic deviation can be reversed safely, but these specimens have progressed too far. Complete purification is the only option." Kira hauled herself through the shaft opening just as her grip strength failed entirely. They weren't trying to save the hybrids at all. The purebloods knew exactly what their serum would do. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was an extermination disguised as a cure. Above her, emergency lights bathed the upper tunnels in red warning glow. Somewhere in the darkness, the last of her people waited for orders. The war between pure humanity and evolved humanity had begun in earnest, and the side that claimed to be saving souls was the one committed to genocide. The screaming started at dawn. Kira jolted awake in the abandoned subway tunnel, her enhanced hearing picking up frequencies that would have been impossible for pure-blood ears. The sound carried an undertone of terror that made her spine bristle with predatory awareness, a response she still wasn't used to, even after months of accepting what she'd become. "Movement above," whispered Thane, his voice a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the concrete walls. His reptilian features were more pronounced in the morning light, filtering through the grates, scales catching the pale illumination like armor, multiple heat signatures. "They're hunting." The pure bloods had found another nest. Kira pressed her palm against the tunnel wall, feeling the vibrations of running feet, the heavier thud of combat boots, and something else. A rhythmic pounding that could only be the hybrid children being driven into the open. Her enhanced metabolism kicked into overdrive, flooding her system with adrenaline and something darker, something that demanded blood in return for blood. "How many?" she asked, though her nose was already giving her the answer. The scent of fierce sweat, gunpowder, and the acrid smell of pure blood technology drifted down through the ventilation system. 30, maybe 40. Marcus emerged from the deeper shadows, his form more liquid than solid in the dim light. The aquatic modifications from his lineage allowed him to move with an unsettling silence that even other hybrids found unnerving. "They have flame units. Whatever they found up there, they mean to burn it out completely." The old Kira would have felt sick at the implication. The new Kira, the creature she was becoming, felt only cold fury. The purebloods weren't just trying to reclaim territory anymore. They were exterminating anything that carried hybrid genes, including children who'd never asked to be born into this genetic nightmare. "We can't let them finish," she said, though part of her mind whispered that she was already lost, that each decision like this pulled her further from whatever humanity she had left. Finally, Thane growled, his claws extending with a sound like knives being unsheathed. "I was beginning to think you still believed we could reason with them." But it was Marcus who surprised her. "Kira's right, but not for the reason you think." His gills fluttered, a sign of agitation. "I've been tracking their patterns for weeks. This isn't random. They're systematically clearing grid sections, moving in a specific direction." "Toward what?" she asked, though the sinking sensation in her stomach suggested she already knew. "The old CDC bunker, the one where they kept the original genetic templates." Marcus's black eyes reflected the tunnel lighting like mirrors. "If they're planning what I think they're planning..." Kira's blood went cold. The genetic templates weren't just historical artifacts. They were the blueprints for reversing the fusion process. In the right hands, they could potentially restore pure blood genetics to the hybrid populations. In the wrong hands, they could create something far worse than either species had ever imagined. Above them, the screaming had stopped. That was somehow worse than when it had been ongoing. "Move," Kira commanded, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her. "Thane, take point. Marcus, sweep the flanks when we surface. You'll what?" Thane's yellow eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. Lead us into a slaughter because you're still thinking like prey instead of predator? The challenge hung in the air between them, and Kira felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been building for weeks. When she looked at Thane now, she didn't see a fellow survivor or even an ally. She saw competition, threat, something that needed to be dominated or eliminated. The realization should have horrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "I'll do what needs to be done," she said quietly, and Thane actually took a step backward. They moved through the tunnels with lethal efficiency. 3 apex predators who had once been human but were rapidly becoming something else entirely. The closer they got to the surface, the stronger the scent of death became, until Kira could taste it on her tongue like copper coins. When they finally emerged through a maintenance shaft 6 blocks from the burning building, the scope of the pure blood operation became clear. This wasn't a simple sweep and clear mission. They had set up a perimeter, established firing positions, and deployed what looked like containment equipment designed specifically for capturing rather than killing. "They're not just exterminating," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible even to enhanced hearing. "They're harvesting." In that moment, watching pure blood soldiers load struggling hybrid survivors into reinforced transport vehicles, Kira felt the last fragments of her human conscience crumble away. What replaced it was something far older and infinitely more dangerous. The recognition that in this war between species, mercy was just another word for extinction. She smiled, and her canines had grown longer in the last few minutes. The real hunt was about to begin. The screaming had stopped 3 hours ago, but Kira's enhanced hearing still caught the wet sounds echoing from the pure blood camp below. She crouched on the cliff top, her scaled skin shifting color to match the granite beneath her, watching as smoke curled up from what had once been humanity's last stronghold. Marcus materialized beside her like shadow given form, his recent transformation still unsettling even to her mutated senses. Where once he'd been merely enhanced, now something alien lurked behind his eyes, a hunger that made her own monstrous appetite seem tame. "They're all dead," he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat. "Every last pure blood in the main camp. What about the others? The ones who escaped into the tunnels?" Marcus tilted his head, listening to frequencies beyond normal perception. "Still running, but it doesn't matter now." He turned to her, and she saw something that chilled her mutated blood, satisfaction. "We didn't kill them, Kira. They killed themselves." She'd seen it happen from their vantage point. The pure blood's experimental weapons, designed to target genetic anomalies in the 7th generation, had backfired catastrophically. Instead of cleansing their enemies, the devices had triggered something dormant within their own supposedly pure DNA, something that had been waiting 7 generations to emerge. "The irony is perfect," Marcus continued, his form flickering between human and something else entirely. "They called us abominations, but they were the real monsters all along. They just didn't know it yet." Below them, movement stirred among the corpses. But these weren't the dead rising. They were the purebloods who had survived the initial transformation. What crawled from the smoking ruins bore no resemblance to the humans who had declared war on the 7th generation. They were things of nightmare-made flesh, all teeth and claws and impossible angles. Kira felt a tremor of fear. "Marcus, what if we can't control them?" "Control them?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Why would we want to? They're us now, or what we would have become if we hadn't learned restraint." His hand found hers, and she flinched at the alien coldness of his touch. "Besides, they'll serve our purpose perfectly." She pulled away, disturbed by how easily he spoke of purpose, as if this had all been planned. What purpose? The war is over. The pure bloods are gone. "No, Kira. The war is just beginning." Marcus gestured toward the horizon, where more smoke columns rose from distant settlements. "This isn't just happening here. Every pure-blood stronghold, every bunker, every hidden community, they all had those weapons. They all tried to use them simultaneously." The magnitude hit her like a physical blow. "You mean I mean, humanity as it once existed is extinct. What's left are us and them." He nodded toward the creatures below. "And something tells me they're not going to be grateful for their transformation." As if summoned by his words, one of the newly changed purebloods looked up at their cliff. Its eyes, too many eyes, fixed on them with unmistakable hunger. It opened its mouth and shrieked, a sound that made Kira's bones ache. Others answered the call, and soon the entire camp writhed with motion as dozens of the transformed began climbing the cliff face. "They want us," Kira breathed, backing away from the edge. "Of course they do." Marcus remained perfectly still, watching the approaching horde with scientific interest. "We represent what they could have been. Controlled evolution instead of chaotic transformation. They're not just hungry, they're envious." The first creature crested the cliff, moving with impossible speed on limbs that shifted and reformed with each movement. Kira's own mutations responded instinctively, her skin hardening into armor plates while toxin sacs swelled along her arms. But Marcus simply stood there, arms outstretched. "Welcome, brothers," he said as the thing lunged for him. What happened next defied explanation. The creature struck Marcus and simply merged with him. Its chaotic flesh flowed into his controlled form, and for a moment he blazed with dark energy. When the light faded, Marcus stood unchanged, but something vital had been added to his presence. "You see," he said conversationally as more creatures approached, "they don't want to destroy us, they want to complete us." Kira watched in horror as he embraced each monstrosity in turn, absorbing their chaotic energy while maintaining his essential form. With each merger he grew more powerful, more alien, more absolutely other. "This is what we were always meant to become," he explained as the last of the transformed purebloods dissolved into his being. Not just evolved humans, but something entirely new. The 8th generation. She ran then, her enhanced speed carrying her away from what Marcus had become. But even as she fled, she could feel the change beginning in her own cells, the call of something vast and patient that had been waiting 7 generations for its children to come home. Behind her, Marcus's laughter followed on the wind, no longer entirely human, promising transformation for everything that still drew breath. The ancient elevator descended through layers of earth and time, its cables singing a funeral dirge in the darkness. Maya pressed her transformed hand against the cold metal wall, feeling the vibrations travel through her bones like whispered secrets. Beside her, Commander Thorn stood rigid, his pure-blood human form seeming fragile and obsolete in the confined space. "How deep does this go?" Maya asked, watching the depth counter spin past numbers that made her stomach lurch. "Deep enough to survive the first wave," Thorn replied. "Deep enough to preserve what we were before your kind corrupted the surface." The elevator shuddered to a halt, and the doors opened with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like a dying breath. The corridor beyond stretched into infinity, lit by bioluminescent panels that pulsed with an organic rhythm. Maya recognized the technology, a hybrid of human engineering and monster biology, the same fusion her people had mastered above ground. "You hypocrites," she breathed, stepping into the passage. "You've been using our innovations all along." Thorn's jaw tightened. "We use what we must to survive. That doesn't mean we've abandoned our humanity." They walked in tense silence, past chambers filled with humming machinery and glass tanks containing specimens Maya couldn't identify. The walls themselves seemed alive, veined with networks of what looked like nervous tissue that twitched at their approach. The deeper they went, the more the boundary between technology and biology blurred. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead, another pure-blood human, but something was wrong with her movements. She walked with the fluid grace of a predator, her eyes reflecting light like mirrors in the dim corridor. "Dr. Chen," Thorn acknowledged. "Status report." The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many. "The final phase is ready, Commander. The subjects are responding better than anticipated." Maya's enhanced hearing caught the sound of breathing from behind the walls, not mechanical ventilation, but the deep, rhythmic inhalation of something vast and alive. The realization hit her like ice water in her veins. "You're not preserving pure humanity," she said, backing away. "You're creating something new." Dr. Chen's laugh was like breaking glass. "Pure humanity was weak, inefficient. We learned from your people's mistakes. Where you randomly fused with monsters, we've been selective, precise." The walls began to shift, revealing viewing windows into chambers beyond. Inside each one, figures moved in nutrient baths, human forms twisted into new configurations, their bodies incorporating elements from creatures that had never walked the Earth's surface. Some had multiple limbs ending in surgical appendages, others bore clusters of sensory organs that pulsed with alien intelligence. "The seventh generation was just the beginning," Thorne said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and revulsion. "We've been working on the 8th, 9th, and 10th, each iteration more perfect than the last." Maya felt her own monster heritage surge within her, scales rippling across her skin as her body prepared for combat. But the creatures in the tanks turned toward her movement with predatory interest, their hybrid eyes tracking her like targeting systems. "You're not human anymore," she whispered. "You've become something worse than we ever were." "Evolution doesn't ask permission," Dr. Chen replied, pressing a sequence of controls on the wall. The nearest tank began to drain, its occupant stirring to consciousness. "Your generation fought to survive. Ours was designed to rule." The creature that emerged from the tank defied classification. Its humanoid frame bore the muscular density of a terrestrial predator, but its limbs ended in appendages that seemed to phase in and out of visible spectrum. When it looked at Maya, she felt her thoughts being examined, catalogued, and dismissed. "Project Ascension," Thorne explained, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "The synthesis of human intellect with capabilities from dimensions we've learned to access. They don't just hunt in three-dimensional space." The dimensional hybrid took a step forward, and Maya felt reality bend around it. For a moment, she existed in multiple probability states simultaneously. Alive, dead, transformed, erased. The sensation was nauseating and terrifying. "They're not human," Maya gasped, struggling to maintain her sense of self as more tanks began to drain. "They're not even from here." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Pure humanity couldn't survive what was coming. Your fusion with surface monsters was crude, but pointed us toward the real solution. We've partnered with entities from spaces between worlds. The corridor filled with the newly awakened hybrids, their presence causing the air itself to shimmer with otherworldly energy." Maya realized with growing horror that the war between the surface dwellers and the underground purebloods had been a distraction, a way to keep the seventh generation busy while something far more alien completed its infiltration of reality itself. As the dimensional hybrids surrounded her with their impossible geometries and hungry intelligence, Maya understood that humanity, in all its forms, had already lost. The real war was just beginning. The bunker's emergency lights flickered red against Maya's scaled skin as she pressed her back against the cold metal wall. The pure-blood human's screams echoed through the corridors behind her, a symphony of terror that made her stomach churn. She had never wanted this, to be the monster in their nightmares. Dr. Kane's laboratory lay just 50 meters ahead, but the distance felt insurmountable. Between her and the quantum stabilizer that could end this war stretched a gauntlet of her own kind, drunk on the scent of untainted human blood. The seventh generation had finally tasted what their ancestors had sacrificed, and the hunger was driving them mad. A wet snarl echoed from the adjacent hallway. Maya recognized the sound. Marcus, her former squadmate, whose fusion with deep-sea predators had gifted him with rows of needle-sharp teeth and an insatiable appetite. She could smell his transformed flesh, a mixture of brine and rot that spoke of humanity's corruption taken to its logical extreme. "Maya," his voice bubbled through transformed vocal cords. "Sweet," conflicted Maya. "Still pretending you're one of them?" She remained silent, feeling the familiar itch beneath her skin as her own modifications responded to the threat. Chitinous plates began to emerge along her arms, while her vision sharpened to predatory focus. The fusion with mantis DNA had made her a perfect killer, whether she wanted to be or not. "I can smell the pure bloods on you," Marcus continued, his footsteps splashing through something that Maya hoped was water. "Their fear is intoxicating. Why deny yourself? We are what evolution demanded." Through the ventilation grate above, Maya heard Dr. Kane's voice over the facility's intercom system. The old, pure-blood scientist was still alive, still trying to activate the quantum field that would separate their genetic templates permanently. The process would kill most of the seventh generation, their hybrid DNA too corrupted to survive the purification, but it would also restore humanity to what it had been before the desperate fusion experiments began. Maya closed her eyes, remembering her grandmother's stories of the surface world before the monsters came. Blue skies instead of perpetual crimson, animals that weren't designed to kill humans on sight, children who could play without growing claws or developing acidic saliva. A pure-blood child's cry pierced the air, followed by wet tearing sounds. Maya's enhanced hearing picked up the subtle differences in the screaming, terror giving way to something worse than death. The seventh generation wasn't just killing their prey anymore, they were converting them, injecting their victims with unstable genetic material that would transform them into mindless killing machines within hours. The war had evolved beyond simple survival. Her people were creating an army. Maya forced herself to move, using her modified joints to climb silently along the ceiling. Below, Marcus emerged into the main corridor, his form barely recognizable as human anymore. His spine had elongated and split into multiple segments, each ending in a grasping appendage lined with sensory organs. Where his eyes had been, clusters of black spheres tracked movement with predatory precision. She watched him test the air, his transformed respiratory system analyzing every molecule for traces of her passage. The fusion process had made them all into living weapons, but it had also made them slaves to instincts that grew stronger with each generation. Her children, if she ever had any, would be even less human than she was. The laboratory door lay just ahead, sealed with both electronic locks and old-fashioned steel barriers. Through the reinforced windows, Maya could see Dr. Kane working frantically at his control station, while a handful of pure-blood survivors huddled in the corner. They looked so fragile, so unmodified, that she felt a strange protectiveness surge through her consciousness. Marcus suddenly looked up, his cluster eyes fixing on her position. "There you are, sister." Maya dropped from the ceiling, landing between him and the laboratory door. Her chitinous armor fully deployed now, turning her arms into living weapons capable of cutting through steel. But as she faced her former friend, she realized that her modifications were nothing compared to what he had become. "The pure bloods made us into this," Marcus said, his multiple appendages weaving hypnotically through the air. "They created monsters to fight their war, then retreated underground while we suffered on the surface. Why protect them now?" "'Cause someone has to break the cycle," Maya replied, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "We can choose to be more than our modifications." Marcus laughed, a sound like grinding bone. "Choice? Look at yourself, Maya. Look at what you've already become. The quantum field won't save you. It will burn away everything that makes you stronger than they ever were." Behind her, Dr. Kane's machinery hummed to life. Maya felt a strange sensation wash over her, as if something fundamental in her cellular structure was beginning to shift. The quantum field was activating, and she was standing directly in its path. Marcus lunged forward, all pretense of conversation abandoned. Maya raised her transformed arms to meet him, knowing that whatever happened next would determine the future of both species. The bunker's emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red as Mira pressed herself against the concrete wall, her enhanced hearing picking up the whispered conversations 3 levels above. The pure-bloods thought they were safe in their sterile fortress, but they hadn't counted on her kind's ability to navigate through ventilation systems that would crush a normal human's bones. The final phase begins at dawn. A familiar voice echoed down the shaft. Director Hawthorne. Every fusion settlement will be sterilized simultaneously. No survivors. Mira's claws extended involuntarily, scraping against the concrete. She forced them back, knowing the sound would carry. Through the grate above, she could see shadows moving in what appeared to be a command center. Banks of monitors displayed aerial views of settlements she recognized. New Haven, where Marcus's sister lived with her children. Thornwall, where the old librarian had taught her to read before the fear took hold and humans stopped venturing into fusion territory. Red dots pulsed on each location. Target markers. She began her descent, moving through the ductwork with serpentine grace. Her spine had elongated over the years, each vertebra now articulated in ways that would have been impossible for her ancestors. The changes had accelerated after Marcus's death, as if grief itself had triggered some dormant genetic sequence. The pure blood's voices grew clearer as she approached the main level. The atmospheric toxin will take approximately 6 hours to break down, someone was saying. After that, our cleanup crews can move in to salvage any useful technology. What about the children? Another voice, younger, uncertain. Contaminated genetics, Hawthorne replied without hesitation. Every generation makes them more monstrous. We're showing mercy by ending their suffering. Mira's vision sharpened, the world taking on the peculiar clarity that preceded her hunting instincts. The membrane that had grown over her eyes in recent months flickered, adjusting to the dim light like a predator's nictitating membrane. She could smell them now, the sterile scent of their underground existence, mixed with something else. Fear. They reeked of it despite their confident words. The ventilation shaft opened into what had once been a parking garage. Ancient vehicles sat beneath dust covers, relics from before the surface became uninhabitable for unmodified humans. Mira dropped silently to the floor, her enhanced musculature absorbing the impact. She moved between the cars, following the scent trail toward the command center. Every few steps, she paused to listen. Her kind had learned patience from the creatures they'd merged with. The ambush instincts of spiders, the territorial awareness of wolves, the calculated stillness of serpents. The door to the stairwell stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see the glow of the upper levels. No guards. The pure bloods had grown complacent in their fortress, believing their location was secret. They didn't understand that some fusions could track electromagnetic signatures, could follow the heat trails of buried power cables across miles of wasteland. As she climbed, Mira thought of the message she'd received that morning, a pheromone signature carried on the wind by one of the aerial scouts. Others like her were moving toward bunkers across the continent. The pure bloods weren't the only ones capable of coordinated strikes. The command center's door was reinforced steel, but Mira's acid glands had developed considerably since her last molting. She pressed her palm against the lock mechanism and felt the metal begin to dissolve beneath the corrosive secretions. The chemical reaction was nearly silent, producing only a faint hissing that masked itself among the humming electronics. Inside, 12 figures hunched over control panels, their pale skin almost translucent under the artificial lights. Generations of underground living had left them looking more alien than many of the fusions they sought to destroy. Director Hawthorne stood at the center, his hand hovering over a master switch. "Initiating release sequence," he announced. "All teams report ready." Mira stepped into the room. Her footsteps were silent, but her presence triggered some primitive alarm in the pure blood's nervous systems. One by one, they turned to face her, their movements sluggish and uncertain. Evolution had stripped away their predator instincts along with their ability to survive on the surface. "Hello, Director," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't existed in human speech for generations. The sound waves were perfectly calibrated to trigger anxiety responses in unmodified nervous systems. Hawthorne's finger stabbed toward the switch, but Mira was already moving. Her limbs extended with fluid grace, covering the distance in a heartbeat. Her hand closed over his wrist with enough force to crack bone. "Did you really think you were the only ones with a plan?" she asked. watching terror bloom in his pale eyes. Around the room, other fusions began emerging from concealment, through air vents, from maintenance shafts, materializing from shadows that had seemed empty moments before. The pure bloods had prepared for war against monsters. They hadn't prepared for war against an intelligence that had learned to think like monsters while retaining human cunning. Outside, dawn was breaking over a world that would never be the same. The ancient elevator shuddered to a halt, its rusted cables groaning like the dying breath of civilization itself. Marcus pressed his transformed hand against the cold metal, feeling the vibrations through his chitinous fingertips as silence settled around them like a burial shroud. Somewhere in the depths below, the pure blood's final stronghold waited. Elena crouched beside him, her serpentine spine undulating as she tasted the air with her forked tongue. "They know we're coming," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics no human throat could produce. "I can smell their fear sweat, sweet and clean like children." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. They had become the monsters in someone else's nightmare. Behind them, the remnants of both armies pressed close in the narrow shaft, fused and pure blood alike, united in their desperation to end this war before it consumed what little remained of their species. The ceasefire had held for exactly 47 minutes, long enough to discover the truth that changed everything. Dr. Sarah Chen's revelation echoed in Marcus's mind as he forced open the elevator doors. The fusions weren't evolution, they were a weapon. 7 generations of careful genetic manipulation, orchestrated by a shadow council that had vanished into these very bunkers when their experiment succeeded beyond their wildest terrors. The corridor beyond stretched into darkness, its walls lined with observation windows that reflected their monstrous forms back at them like accusations. Captain Rodriguez, his human features pale but determined, raised his weapon and stepped forward first, a gesture that spoke louder than any treaty. "The readings are off the charts," Chen whispered, consulting her scanner with shaking hands. "The genetic material down here, it's unlike anything we've encountered. Not human, not monster, something else entirely." They moved deeper into the facility, passing chambers filled with suspended animation pods and walls covered in evolutionary charts that made Marcus's stomach churn. Humanity's family tree, but twisted into obscene shapes, branches splitting and merging in ways that violated every natural law. Elena's head snapped to the left, her enhanced hearing catching something the others missed. Movement. Multiple contacts approaching from the laboratory sector. The sound that emerged from the shadows wasn't footsteps. It was a wet, sliding motion, like something massive dragging itself across the floor. The emergency lighting flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. "My God," Rodriguez breathed, and Marcus followed his gaze to the far end of the corridor. They emerged from the darkness like living nightmares, but these weren't the pure bloods they'd been fighting. These were the architects, the original puppet masters who had orchestrated humanity's transformation from their underground kingdom. 7 generations of isolation and genetic experimentation had changed them into something that made even the fused look human by comparison. Their leader spoke with a voice like grinding glass, its words emerging from a throat that had been surgically modified beyond recognition. The children returned to their makers. How delightfully predictable. Marcus felt his combat instincts surge, but Elena's hand on his arm held him back. Around them, fused and pure-blood soldiers aimed their weapons at targets that barely registered as terrestrial. "You're the Council," Chen said, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "The ones who started the genetic fusion program. But what have you become?" Laughter echoed through the corridor, a sound like breaking bones. "We became what you were always meant to become, what you were too weak to embrace. You see, the monsters you fought on the surface, they were never the enemy. They were the raw material. We needed subjects who could survive the transformation, who could carry our work to its logical conclusion." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. The surface war, the decades of struggle between human and monster, the careful genetic modifications passed down through generations. It had all been orchestrated. They were lab rats in a maze, dancing to music only their creators could hear. The real war, the thing continued, was never between human and monster. It was between the old flesh and the new, between the prison of natural evolution and the freedom of designed perfection. Rodriguez stepped forward, his weapon trained on the creature's center mass. "You destroyed our world. We saved it from stagnation. But our children proved disappointing. Too much human weakness remained. That's why you're here, isn't it? To stop us from completing our work?" Elena's transformation began before Marcus could stop her, her human disguise melting away to reveal the predator beneath. Around them, other fused followed suit, abandoning any pretense of humanity as they prepared to face their creators. "The only thing we're here to stop," Marcus said, feeling his own enhanced physiology surge to combat readiness, "is you." The creature's smile revealed rows of crystalline teeth. "Then, let us show you what 7 generations of unrestrained evolution looks like." The final battle was about to begin, and humanity's future, whatever that meant anymore, hung in the balance. The ancient bunker doors groaned open with a mechanical wheeze that echoed across the battlefield like the death rattle of civilization itself. From within the sterile depths emerged figures that seemed carved from humanity's forgotten dreams, straight spines, unmarked flesh, eyes that held no trace of the beautiful horror that had consumed their species above ground. Maya's transformed heart hammered against ribs that had grown harder than steel. Around her, the 7th generation stirred uneasily, their enhanced senses picking up something fundamentally wrong about these newcomers. The pure bloods moved with an alien grace, their untainted genetics a stark reminder of what had been sacrificed in the name of survival. "Look at them," whispered Kyle, his voice carrying harmonics that no human throat should produce. "They're so fragile." But Maya felt no superiority watching the pure bloods advance across the scarred earth. Instead, a crushing weight of loss settled over her enhanced frame. These were ghosts of a species that had chosen extinction over evolution, purity over adaptation. They carried themselves with the rigid dignity of the condemned. The pure blood leader stepped forward, her movements precise and calculated. She wore no armor, bore no visible weapons, yet something about her presence made even the most fearsome of the 7th generation hesitate. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp authority of uncompromised humanity. "We are what you abandoned," she declared, her words cutting through the morning air. "We are what you chose to sacrifice when you opened your veins to monsters." Maya found herself stepping forward, her transformed body casting multiple shadows in the strange light. "We chose to live. You chose to hide. We chose to remain human." The pure blood's eyes fixed on Maya with uncomfortable intensity. "Do you even remember what that means?" The question hit like a physical blow. Around them, the battlefield fell silent except for the whisper of wind through ruins. Maya searched within herself for memories of her original form, but found only fragments, the phantom sensation of unclawed fingers, the ghost of teeth that hadn't been designed for tearing flesh. "Humanity was never pure," Maya said finally. "We were always becoming something else. You just refused to see it." The pure blood leader smiled, and the expression was terrible in its absolute normalcy. "Perhaps, but what we became in our bunkers was still recognizably us. What you became." Her gaze swept over the assembled 7th generation, taking in their magnificent and terrifying forms. "What you became was magnificent and monstrous and utterly alien." Behind the leader, more pure bloods emerged from the bunker. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Each one a perfect reproduction of humanity's original template, unmarked by the desperate bargains that had saved their surface-dwelling kin. They carried weapons Maya recognized from history books, crude firearms, metal blades, tools that seemed laughably primitive against the living weapons the seventh generation had become. Yet as the pure bloods spread across the battlefield, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced since her first transformation, genuine fear, not of death. The seventh generation had long ago transcended such simple concerns, but of something far worse. The fear of being measured against an absolute standard and found wanting. "You think we're afraid of you," Kyle snarled, his form rippling as defensive adaptations activated unconsciously. "You think your guns and your righteousness make you dangerous." The pure blood leader tilted her head with scholarly interest. "No, I think you're afraid of what we represent, the road not taken, the choice that could have preserved something worth preserving." Maya's enhanced vision picked up the subtle movements of her generation preparing for battle. Scales shifted, claws extended, internal organs realigned for combat efficiency. They had become perfect predators, ultimate survivors, living embodiments of humanity's will to endure. The pure blood simply stood their ground, achingly vulnerable and absolutely unafraid. "There's still time," the leader said, her voice carrying across the space between worlds. "Not to return, that path is closed forever, but to remember, to honor what was sacrificed so that you could become what you are." For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Maya saw a different ending, a world where the two branches of humanity might coexist, each carrying something precious the other had lost. The pure bloods with their untainted memories of human dreams and limitations, the seventh generation with their hard-won adaptability and strength. Then Kyle roared, a sound that shattered the moment like glass, and the battlefield erupted into chaos. The war between what humanity was and what it had become began not with grand declarations or noble speeches, but with the simple, terrible realization that some choices could never be undone. As Maya launched herself toward the pure bloodlines, her transformed body moving with deadly grace, she carried with her the weight of 7 generations of necessary compromise. The last war of humanity had begun, and there would be no victors, only survivors, and the endless question of whether survival alone was enough.